I found out I was pregnant last week. Bradley and I had been together for almost 3 years. We hadn't been actively trying, but having kids had come up in conversation before. He always said he wanted kids someday. I felt nervous about telling him because things had been rocky recently. He'd been distant, working late, and acting weird about money. I figured maybe a baby would pull us back together. I grabbed a test on my lunch break and took it in the office bathroom. 2 lines, definitely pregnant. I left work early, planning to surprise him. He works from home on Thursdays. I was so excited on the drive over that I almost called, but I wanted to see his reaction in person. Our apartment complex has this odd setup where the living room is visible from the parking lot. I spotted Bradley on the couch with his laptop open. I was about to call out when I noticed he was on FaceTime. I froze for a second and just watched. He was talking to Tracy, his ex from before. They'd broken up about 4 years earlier, and he'd always told me she was controlling and crazy. He'd said they hadn't stayed in touch, but there she was on his screen. I couldn't hear them, but they were both laughing. I don't know why, but I couldn't move. I didn't go inside. Instead, I got back in my car and phoned him. I told him I was leaving work early and would be home in 20 minutes. He sounded off and said he was. I drove around the block and parked down the side street. Then I snuck back and stood beneath the living room window. I know how crazy that sounds, but something felt wrong. That's when I heard Bradley was still on the phone with Tracy, telling her how serious things were getting with me and how I was pressuring him about marriage, which I hadn't been. We'd only talked about it once, maybe 6 months ago. Tracy asked something I couldn't catch, and Bradley said, "She's so stupid and desperate. She believes everything I say. I'm just using her for her money until you take me back. She's pathetic. Actually thinks we'll get married," he said, and they both laughed. "I've been supporting us since Bradley lost his job last year. He said he was freelancing, but money's been tight. I was covering rent, groceries, his car payment, even the vacation to visit his parents." Tracy said something else, and Bradley replied, "Yeah, babe, I know. Just a few more months and I'll have enough saved. She has no idea I've been putting money aside. Thinks I'm broke." I wanted to scream, or throw up, or do both. 3 years. 3 years of my life invested in someone who was using me, and I was carrying his child. Somehow I kept it together. I walked back to my car, drove around for 15 minutes, then came inside acting like nothing had happened. I pretended to be glad to see him. I kissed him hello and asked how his day was. He lied to my face about the work call, saying he was stressed about a deadline. When he asked why I was home early, I said I wasn't feeling well. That wasn't exactly untrue. I felt sick to my stomach. I didn't tell him about the pregnancy. That night he behaved completely normally. We ordered takeout, and of course I paid. This morning I checked our bank accounts. Over the last year I've spent more than $45,000 supporting us. He hadn't contributed a dime. While he was in the shower, I looked through his phone. There were hundreds of messages to Tracy. They'd been planning for him to move back to her city. He'd been sending her money. My money. I found a secret account where he'd been saving almost $30,000. Money he'd claimed was for bills or job training courses. There were even screenshots of conversations where he'd asked my friends about my finances. He'd been fishing for info, asking if I'd mentioned bonuses or raises, like he was studying me and plotting how to get the most out of the situation. I found messages where he complained I was boring in bed and said he couldn't wait to be with Tracy again. He'd admitted he was only with me for financial security, while he got his shit together. There were intimate photos they'd sent each other while I was at work paying our bills. I wanted to storm the living room, confront him, throw his stuff out the window, scream that I knew everything, tell him about the baby he'd never meet. But something held me back. I realized that if I exposed him right then, he'd just leave, take my money and vanish back to Tracy. They'd laugh about how stupid I'd been and how easy I was to manipulate. Even worse, he might play the remorseful dad and stay long enough to drain me for years of child support. No way. I needed a plan. Bradley thinks I'm a doormat who will take whatever he dishes out. He thinks I'm too blind to see through his lies, and that I'll end up begging him to stay when he walks out. He has no idea what I'm capable of. Update. First, thank you so much for the support and advice on my last post. I didn't expect thousands of comments and messages. You all have been incredible. I spent the next 2 days moving through the apartment like a ghost while my head spun. Bradley didn't notice a thing. He was too busy texting Tracy and planning their future with the money I'd earned working 60-hour weeks, while he sat on our couch applying for jobs and networking. The first thing I did was protect what was left. I went to the bank during lunch and opened an account at a completely different bank. I started routing most of my paycheck there, and left just enough in our joint account to avoid suspicion. I changed every password I had, and set up alerts for any withdrawals over $100. Then I started collecting proof. Everything. Screenshots of their texts, photos of his secret bank statements, even recordings of his calls with Tracy while I pretended to be showering. I found receipts too. Expensive gifts he'd bought her with my credit card. Designer purses, jewelry, little luxury things for her, while I was at the grocery store buying generic cereal just to save a few bucks. The whole time, I kept thinking about the baby growing inside me, this tiny life depending on me while I was being drained dry by someone I thought loved me. Every time I felt sick or exhausted, I reminded myself it wasn't just about me anymore. I had someone else to protect now. So I called my oldest friend Freya. We've been friends since kindergarten. I didn't tell her everything over the phone, just said that Bradley and I were having some serious issues and I might need a place to crash. She didn't hesitate for a second, told me her spare room was mine anytime I needed it. Next, I called my brother Sam. He's always been protective, and I knew if I told him the full story, he'd show up on Bradley's doorstep ready to throw punches. So instead, I said I needed help moving a few things into storage, because Bradley and I were reorganizing. He said he'd bring his truck that weekend. Meanwhile, Bradley started getting suspicious, kept asking why I was acting so strange and distant. The nerve of this man. After 3 years of lies, theft, and mocking me behind my back, he thought I was the one acting weird because I'd been quiet for 2 days. I wanted to laugh in his face. Instead, I told him I was just stressed from work and dealing with cramps. He dropped it immediately. He never cared about my problems unless they somehow affected him. Friday night, I told him I was going out for drinks with coworkers. He looked relieved, probably couldn't wait to FaceTime Tracy without whispering, but instead of going anywhere, I sat in my car in the parking garage with my laptop using the apartment Wi-Fi to the feed from our home security camera. We'd installed it after a break-in next door last year, and Bradley had completely forgotten it existed, since I handled everything related to bills and maintenance. About 20 minutes after I left, he plopped down on the couch and propped up his phone. Tracy's face filled the screen. They were laughing like teenagers. I turned up the volume on my laptop and listened. Bradley said he was worried I might be catching on. Tracy's voice came through, faint but clear. She told him to relax and stick to the plan. "Just 3 more weeks," she said, "and you'll get the bonus money. Then you can come home to me." My bonus. The quarterly one I'd worked overtime for. The one that was supposed to finally clear my student loans. He was waiting for that. Bradley complained that pretending with me was getting harder, that I'd been clingy lately. Clingy? I could barely remember the last time we'd been intimate. He was always too tired or too stressed from the job he didn't even have. They talked for over an hour, about vacations they'd take, about what they'd buy, about how gullible I was. At one point, Tracy joked that I should buy him a new laptop before he left, as a parting gift. They both laughed, hard. Then I saw something flicker across Tracy's face when he wasn't looking. A cold, calculating expression that made me wonder if she was conning him too. But just as quickly, she replaced it with that sugary smile she always used when he looked back at the screen. I'd seen enough. Way more than enough. Time for action. Saturday morning, I told Bradley I had to go into the office for a few hours. Instead, I drove straight to meet with a lawyer named Angelina. She'd helped a coworker of mine through a brutal divorce last year. Angelina listened quietly while I laid everything out. The cheating, the financial abuse, the hidden accounts. Even the pregnancy I hadn't mentioned to Bradley. She didn't judge me once. She said financially, it was a strong case for fraud. He had clearly misrepresented himself to get money and support from me, and the texts proved intent. She believed we could recover some of what he'd taken, though it might take time. When I asked about the baby, she told me gently that I wasn't legally obligated to tell him during the pregnancy. After the birth, he could petition for paternity, but given the evidence, his access could likely be limited. I nodded, taking detailed notes on my phone. We went over restraining orders, changing the locks, and the process to remove him from our lease. I paid her retainer from my new account. That afternoon, Sam showed up with his truck just like we planned. Bradley looked confused when I started packing boxes. I smiled and said we were just reorganizing, like I'd mentioned earlier. Told him these were going into storage to make space. What he didn't know was that those boxes held every important thing I owned. My personal documents, my grandmother's jewelry, family photos, diplomas, anything valuable or irreplaceable. Sam quietly helped me carry it all out, while Bradley sat in the living room watching TV. Sam kept giving me worried looks but didn't ask questions. When he was leaving, he hugged me tight and whispered that whatever was going on, I wasn't alone. I almost told him everything right there. Almost. But I wasn't ready. Sunday morning, I told Bradley I was meeting Freya for brunch, but instead, I met with my bank manager. I showed him screenshots and messages proving that Bradley had been using my accounts and planning to leave. He helped me dispute several large transfers and locked my accounts with additional security measures. When I came home, Bradley was still asleep, his phone clutched to his chest like a child holding it. I took it carefully. I already knew the password. My birthday. How poetic. There were new messages from... She was talking about checking flight prices, saying once he got my bonus, they could book tickets for the 18th. "She'll never know what hit her," she wrote. I took screenshots of everything and emailed them to myself and to Angelina, then put his phone right back where I found it. Monday morning, I called in sick to work. Waited until Bradley left for his so-called networking event, which was actually coffee with Tracy, according to his location sharing, and went straight to the bank. I withdrew $25,000 from our joint savings, not the full amount, just enough to sting without setting off alarms, and transferred it into my secure account. When he got home that night, he was practically glowing, trying to kiss me, acting affectionate, telling me all about his meetings. It took everything in me not to scream at him, not to tell him I knew he'd spent the day planning our breakup with the woman he really loved. Instead, I smiled, asked how his day was, listened to every lie spill out of his mouth about new job leads and promising contacts. Then I said I had good news too. Reminded him how I'd been saving for us to maybe buy a house someday. His eyes lit up instantly, pure, unfiltered greed. He'd completely forgotten about those savings, too focused on my upcoming bonus. I told him I'd been pre-approved for a mortgage, that it might finally be time to start. He wrapped me in a hug, probably calculating how much more he could take before disappearing for good. He suggested we celebrate. I smiled sweetly and told him I'd make a reservation somewhere special that... He was so blinded by the thought of more money that he didn't even notice me quietly packing a small overnight bag while he's in the shower. Didn't question why I suddenly had to work late. That as soon as I left, I drove straight to Freya's apartment, and the moment I walked through her door, I completely broke. I told her everything. Showed her every screenshot, every receipt, every shred of evidence I had. I watched her expression shift from shock to anger, to this fierce, protective determination I've only ever seen in her a few times before. That night, I slept in her spare room with my phone turned off. Let Bradley worry for once. Let him wonder where I was, what I was doing. Just a small preview of what was coming his way. The next morning, I woke up to 6 missed calls and a dozen frantic texts. I replied with a cheerful little message saying I'd fallen asleep at Freya's after a girls' night and hadn't meant to worry him. Said I'd be home after work like nothing was wrong. At the office, I pulled my boss, Dave, aside. Told him I was going through some personal stuff and might need flexible hours for a bit. Didn't get into details, but something in my face must have said enough. He immediately agreed and told me to take whatever time I needed. The dinner reservation was set for Saturday. All week, Bradley acted like the perfect boyfriend, bringing me coffee, offering massages, asking how my day was. Each gesture made my stomach turn. Each touch made my skin crawl. But I smiled, played along, let him think his little performance was working. Friday night, I packed another bag while he was in the bathroom. More clothes, more essentials. Told him I was donating old stuff to make space for new furniture once we bought our house. He even helped carry the bags to my car, completely unaware that he was assisting in his own downfall. That night, I barely slept. Bradley snored beside me, one arm thrown across me like he owned me. I slipped out from under it, disgusted, and stood in the dark living room for a long time, staring at the life I'd built, the life I paid for, while he planned to walk away with everything. Saturday came, the day everything would end. Bradley spent an hour getting ready, fussing with his hair and checking his reflection. I put on a simple black dress and the necklace my mom gave me before she passed. Somehow, having it around my neck that day felt important, like she was there with me. As we drove to the restaurant, Bradley chatted excitedly about the kind of house he wanted. A home office, a game room, maybe a hot tub. I nodded, smiled, and let him dream, while mentally going over the last few steps of my plan. The restaurant was fancy. Bradley's eyes widened at the prices, but I told him kindly to order whatever he wanted. "Today we celebrate," I said. He went all in, ordered the most expensive steak on the menu, 2 premium cocktails, appetizers, the works. Watching him run up the bill almost made me laugh. One last splurge on my dime. When dessert time came, I excused myself to the bathroom. Checked my phone. Everything was ready. Texted Freya one word. Now. I returned to the table, calm, steady, collected. Bradley was hunched over his phone typing something, but he quickly put it away when he saw me, probably updating Tracy about the house plans and bragging about how easy I was to manipulate. A waiter appeared with champagne, something I'd secretly pre-ordered. Bradley raised his glass with that fake smile and said, "To us, to our future." I lifted my water glass instead. Didn't correct him when he assumed I wasn't drinking because I was driving. Then I said softly, "I'd like to make a toast, too." His smile faltered instantly. I told him I wanted to toast to new beginnings, and to the truth finally coming to light. Then I reached into my purse, pulled out my phone, and placed it face up on the table. Pressed play. From the tiny speaker came his voice, crystal clear. "She's so stupid and desperate she believes everything I say. I'm just using her for her money until you take me back." I watched the blood drain from his face as the words filled the quiet air around us. His expression twisted. First confusion, then horror, then pure panic. He realized right then that it was over. The con. The lies. The fantasy future he'd built with my money. And for the first time in 3 years, I saw the real Bradley. Final update. I'm still trying to process everything that's happened since that night. First of all, thank you, truly, for all the support, the kind words and advice. You have no idea how much it helped me keep it together through this nightmare. Here's what happened next. Bradley's face went through about 10 emotions in 30 seconds. Shock, confusion, anger, and finally, calculation. I could practically see him flipping through lies in his mind, trying to find one that might save him. He started babbling that I didn't understand the context. I calmly raised a hand and told him to stop. The restaurant buzzed with quiet conversation around us, but we might as well have been alone. I told him I had hours of recordings, hundreds of screenshots. I knew about every dollar he'd stolen, every lie, every hidden account. Bradley leaned forward, voice low and desperate, calling me baby, swearing it wasn't what it looked like. Said he and Tracy were just joking around, that she was trying to win him back, but he'd turned her down. I actually laughed out loud. The audacity of this man, lying even after I'd played his own words to his face. I reminded him about the 30 grand of my money he'd sent her, the expensive bracelet he bought her while telling me we couldn't afford to fix my car, the plan to leave once my bonus came in. He started glancing around, worried about people over here. Then he leaned in and suggested we go home and talk like adults. I told him there was nothing left to discuss, and that it wasn't his home anymore. That morning, I'd already had him removed from the lease. All of his things were boxed up and waiting, at Dave's place. Bradley's jaw dropped open like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. He immediately started protesting that it was our apartment. I calmly corrected him. It wasn't. My name was the only one on the lease. My money paid every bill, and my work had kept that roof over our heads. He was nothing more than a guest who'd overstayed his welcome by about 3 years. He scoffed that I was overreacting to some stupid joke with an ex. In response, I pulled a folder from my purse and slid it across the table. Inside were printed copies of his secret account records, transfer receipts, screenshots. All of it. Every bit of proof showing how he'd been bleeding me dry behind my back. He flipped through the pages, growing paler with each one. Then he accused me of spying on him and said that was illegal. I almost laughed. The irony of a man who'd stolen $45,000 lecturing me about legality was unbelievable. Bradley snapped that he never stole anything, that I'd given him that money, that I'd offered to support him. I asked if lying about job training courses, calling me stupid and pathetic, and planning to leave once he got what he wanted counted as support. He shrugged, completely dropping the nice guy act. Said people say things they don't mean when they're venting. "Everyone does it," he said flatly. I asked if that was what he was doing when he wired my money to Tracy, or bought her gifts with my credit card, or planned his move to her city. His tone shifted, suddenly defensive. "What do you want then?" he asked. "Money? An apology?" I told him I wanted one simple thing, for him to be gone, from my apartment, my accounts, and my life. He asked, "And if I refuse?" So I slid another document across the table, a letter from my lawyer outlining the fraud charges we'd be filing if he didn't cooperate. The police, I told him, would be very interested in how he'd been funding his unemployment. Bradley's eyes scanned the page, his jaw tightening. "You wouldn't actually do it," he said. I smiled faintly. "Try me." Finally, he slumped back in his chair and muttered, "Fine, I'll get my stuff and go. But you're making a huge mistake." I told him there was no mistake. There was just reality, and reality was, we had nothing left. It had all been built on lies. He reached for my hand across the table, but I pulled it back before he could touch me. He tried again to explain himself, mumbling excuses, but I cut him off, told him his own messages already said everything. Desperate. Pathetic. Stupid. That's what he'd called me. He started repeating that people say things they don't mean. I told him to stop talking. It was over. Completely and finally over. His face hardened, his voice turning cold. He asked where his stuff was. I said everything had already been moved to Dave's, except for what he'd bought with my money. He scowled that it wasn't fair. I laughed under my breath and asked if he really wanted to discuss fairness, after years of deception, theft, and mockery, after using me until there was nothing left to take. I told him he'd forfeited the right to talk about what was fair. He said, "What if I just go back to the apartment myself?" I kept my voice calm and even, explained that the locks had been changed, the key fob was disabled, and security had been notified. Also, my brother Sam was waiting there, just in case he got any ideas. Bradley's face flushed red with anger. You had this all planned out, he snapped. I learned from the best, I said. You spent 3 years planning how to use me. I spent 1 week planning how to end it. He shot up from his chair, knocking his napkin to the floor. This isn't over, he spat. Yes, it is, I said quietly. Completely over. Goodbye. He stormed out of the restaurant. I took a deep breath, pulled out my phone, and called Sam. Told him Bradley might try showing up at the apartment. Sam said not to worry. He and Freya were already there. They had my back. When I got home, Sam and Freya were sitting on the couch with a bottle of wine open. Freya asked gently how it went, then poured me a glass before catching herself and apologizing. Sam raised an eyebrow. I took a deep breath and said it. I was pregnant. The room went silent. Sam asked softly if it was Bradley's, and if he knew. I nodded. Yes, it was his. He didn't know. Might never know. Freya reached across the table, squeezed my hand, and said they'd support me no matter what I chose. We talked late into the night about what had happened at the restaurant and what I needed to do next. Sam was worried Bradley might get dangerous now that he'd been exposed, so he insisted on staying over. Freya did too. They slept in my room while I took the spare. I couldn't bear to lie in the bed Bradley and I. Around midnight, the texts started. First came the angry ones. Threats, accusations, even talk of lawsuits. Then came the manipulative ones. Apologies, begging, claiming he still loved me but confused, that Tracy had pressured him. I forwarded every message to my lawyer. Didn't respond once. At 2 a.m, the pounding on my front door started. Bradley was yelling my name, demanding I talk to him. Sam stepped up and called through the door, telling him I didn't want to speak and to leave. Bradley shouted back that it was his apartment too. Sam replied, not anymore, and warned him to leave before the police got involved. Bradley kept pounding and yelling, but Freya had already called 911. By the time officers arrived, he was gone. They took a report for the restraining order documentation. By morning, my phone was flooded with more messages, swinging wildly between apologies and explanations. I blocked his number. Then Sam and Freya helped me clear out the last traces of him from the apartment. In the process, we found a hidden credit card statement showing even more purchases for Tracy, and photos of them together from trips he'd taken, supposedly for job interviews. Around noon, my phone rang again. Tracy. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. Her voice was calm, almost too calm. She said Bradley was telling everyone I was crazy, obsessed, making up stories because I couldn't handle being dumped, that he was painting himself as the victim, and she thought I should be prepared because he's very convincing. Something about the way she said it made me pause. I asked how she would even know that. She gave a little laugh and said quietly, because he did the same thing to me 4 years ago. She told me he'd done the same thing to her, used her for money, cheated, then called her psychotic when she caught him. I sat there stunned, trying to piece together how she could have been FaceTiming him, laughing with him, planning a future, taking my money through him, and still claim she wasn't part of it. Tracy said she'd been playing him this time, that she knew exactly what he was, and all she wanted was to get back the money he'd stolen from her before moving on to me. I asked why she was telling me all of this now. Her tone went cold. Because he's dangerous when cornered, she said, and you just cornered him, in public. He's humiliated, exposed, unpredictable, be careful. After hanging up, I just stared at my phone. I didn't know whether to believe her, or if this was just another layer of their twisted game. I called my lawyer to tell her about the conversation. She advised adding Tracy to the restraining order, to establish distance and keep every loose thread tied off. Sunday passed in a blur of texts from Bradley. I didn't read more than a few words of each before forwarding them straight to my lawyer. On Monday, I went back to work, determined to feel normal again. Dave checked in quietly, never prying, just offering support. At lunch, I finally scheduled my prenatal appointment. For the first time, the pregnancy felt real. The thought of carrying Bradley's child still made me nauseous, but I made a promise to myself right then. This baby would grow up with love, security, and a parent who'd never make them feel small. After work, I headed to Freya's. Sam brought takeout and updates. Apparently, Bradley had tried to access our drained joint account, showed up at Dave's ranting about lawsuits, and called Sam repeatedly, switching between threats and desperate pleas. Around 8 that evening, my phone rang from an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. Bradley's slurred voice came through, venomous and shaky. You think you're so smart, huh? I said calmly. I'm hanging up. Don't call again. He suddenly exploded, shouting that I'd ruined his life, wasted his years, calling me a controlling bitch. I ended the call, blocked the number, and logged the incident for my lawyer. The next morning, a certified letter arrived from his attorney, demanding equitable distribution, and threatening to sue me for his supposed investment in our... My lawyer laughed when I showed her. She said once they reviewed the fraud evidence, his lawyer would drop him like a bad habit. By Wednesday, Bradley had found out I was staying with Freya. He showed up pounding on her door, yelling my name. Freya called the police while I stood there recording every second. When officers arrived, he was still shouting, clearly drunk. They arrested him for public intoxication and trespassing, another incident added to our growing case file. Thursday, the temporary restraining order was officially granted. Bradley couldn't come near me, my home, or my workplace. Couldn't touch my accounts or property. Sam served him the papers. He said Bradley went white with rage, crumpled the documents, and threw them to the ground. By Friday, he violated the order anyway, showed up at my office, screaming for me in the lobby. Security stopped him before he could get near me. Dave witnessed everything and offered to testify. Bradley was escorted out while shouting that I'd stolen from him and that everyone would know the truth soon. Monday morning, I woke up queasy from morning sickness. While sipping ginger tea, my phone buzzed with a text. Congrats on the baby, it said. When were you planning to tell me? My stomach dropped. Only 3 people knew. Freya, Sam, and my doctor. Then another message came through. Tracy had told him. Apparently, she said I'd mentioned it when we spoke. My blood ran cold. She'd been feeding him information the entire time, pretending to warn me while still working both sides. I forwarded the texts to my lawyer, blocked Tracy, and decided from that point on I'd trust no one outside my immediate circle. At work, I met with HR and gave them a brief overview. Told them I had an abusive ex and a restraining order, and I needed to ensure my safety. They were kind, understanding, and quick to act, alerting security and offering flexible arrangements. That afternoon, my lawyer called with good news. The judge had approved a permanent restraining order and was reviewing the case for possible criminal charges tied to Bradley's financial fraud. She said it was a solid outcome, that I'd handled everything exactly right. That night, lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling and thought about the future, about raising a child on my own, about the inevitable questions, why their father wasn't around, how to explain the absence without the bitterness. But for the first time in years, I felt free. No more funding someone else's ambitions while burying my own. No more accepting crumbs of affection while being mocked behind my back. No more playing the fool. Bradley thought he'd broken me, but all he did was set me free, and that's something he'll never, ever understand.